Reading today, Acts 7:29 and 30. When he heard this word, Moses fled and lived as a foreigner in the land of Midian, where he fathered 2 sons. After 40 years, an angel appeared to him in the desert of Mount Sinai in a flame of fire in a bush. Well, I was wondering if it is known what Moses did during the 40 years he was in Midian, if he was indeed there the entire 40 years. According to the book of Jasher, Moses, when fleeing, was not on his way to Midian, and on the way to Midian, he passed through Cush, Ethiopia, and there was a problem, because Balaam, who was a prophet of the Gentiles, had prophecy, but he was evil. He used sorcery and other things. After a situation that occurred with the Pharaoh, since Balaam was an advisor, he left, and during that time usurped the kingdom of Cushi. While the king was on a journey during a war they won, Balaam, who had been entrusted with the care of the kingdom during that time due to his supposed wisdom, took advantage of the situation and closed the gates, not allowing the king to enter. When he returned, he clearly prepared himself, since the king would remain outside as if besieging the city, but they were losing. Basically, when Moses arrives, he takes care of making Balaam flee. He has a very good idea to allow the king's army to enter the city. There were 3 entrances through which the army could enter, but all were protected in one way or another. One of those 3 was full of snakes. Then Moses trained the army and had them raise a certain number of soldiers and feed a hawk for a time. Once that falcon had become familiar with its owner and saw that he was the one feeding it, they left it without food for a while. Then they approached where all the snakes were, and these falcons took care of consuming the snakes, allowing them to enter. Upon entering and conquering, by that time the king was unwell and very old. Then they appointed Moses as king in Cush, but he never did so out of respect for his ancestors, in the sense that he knew Abraham instructed Isaac to only be with someone close in terms of faith, even familial. Given the time, the truth we have already discussed, the genetics as they were at that time, and also due to the falsehood of other nations. He was concerned that his descendants marrying people from other nations could lead them astray into lies. So Moses does not lie with the queen, but he takes the kingdom, respects her, and so on, but he does not lie with her and remains that way for years. However, there came a moment when she could no longer bear it and went to the advisors of the people saying, "This man has not touched me, he has not consummated the marriage, and he is not from our family or nation, and he should not be reigning." Furthermore, by that time the king's son had already grown up, so they said it was enough. Then he said, "Now the king's son can take the kingdom." Thousands then approached Moses with the utmost care and fear. But Moses, being the most humble man in the world according to scripture, obviously setting aside Yahushua HaMashiach, or one could say the most humble man of the first 4,000 years, accepted and said yes with great pleasure. He then left the throne and continued on his way. That was when he arrived in Midian, met Zipporah, and Zipporah went and told her father that she had found an Egyptian. The father thought he was an Egyptian who was fleeing from the law, which was actually relatively true since he had killed someone. That's why he ran away, because he had been accused and they wanted to kill him. He killed someone justly, that is true, and Zipporah's father imprisoned him for 10 years, hoping that someone would come for him, but no one ever arrived. In the end, Zipporah asked them to go see him. The father thought he was already dead, but he goes and checks anyway. It turns out that Zipporah had been feeding him all that time. He didn't know. He thinks it's a miracle. Dad, the Jethro. Then they allow him to leave the prison, since they know he wasn't a criminal, because they had already come to look for him. And Moses goes to what would be like the courtyard of Jethro, where there was a staff stuck in the ground, and Moses grabbed it, seeing some Hebrew letters, and he released it from the earth. And when Jethro realized this, he told him that he had said he would give his daughter Zipporah as a wife to the man who could take that scepter from there. That scepter would have been brought from Egypt and would have been the scepter that Joseph had, who, like Balaam, was also an advisor to the king. When Balaam gave bad advice, Jethro gave the opposite counsel. After what happened there, each went their separate ways, one to Cush and the other to Midian. Then he took that scepter, brought it from the treasure of the Pharaoh, took it to his house, and would have placed it in his courtyard. And no one had been able to release it once he had placed it there. And when Moses arrived, he was able to. That was like a sign that he had been chosen for something by the Almighty, and that would have been the staff that later turned into a serpent. Then Moses stays with Jethro as his father-in-law and begins to tend to his sheep, since Jethro was the priest of Midian and wanted to leave behind the idolatry and falsehood of the priesthood of this world, of the religions of this world. Then he left the position that was the highest at that time, Midian, and after having been the most respected man, he became someone whom no one looked upon favorably because he left the priesthood, he left their Elohim. So he had to make or ask his daughters to tend to the sheep, which is what men normally did. That is why they were at the well when Moses arrived, and he met Zipporah there. While Moses was taking care of his sheep, the sheep of Jethro and his grandfather, he saw how he cared for the sheep, noticed one that was lost, and left all the others to go retrieve the one that had strayed. When he found it, he lifted it up gently because he thought it was tired, considering how a creature, a little animal, might be feeling, something that many people overlook, not even thinking about that for other human beings. Then Yahweh was able to see the character of Moses there, the way of doing things of Moses, in order to choose him to become the shepherd of Israel. Then there he called to him through the bush, placing there the angel as a fire.